The operations center hummed with controlled urgency as morning light bled through reinforced windows. Screens glowed with satellite feeds, radio chatter crackled through overhead speakers, and officers moved between stations with the efficient rhythm of a military nerve center under pressure. Maps covered every wall, topographical charts marked with red zones, enemy positions, and one specific area circled multiple times in black marker, a valley, deep in hostile territory, where 220 Navy SEALs had been operating for 3 days without resupply. Lieutenant Commander Jessica Chen stood near the back of the room, hands clasped behind her back, posture relaxed but attentive. She wore simple fatigues, no rank insignia visible, no unit patches, nothing that identified her as anything more than another officer passing through. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, her boots worn but polished, her presence so understated that most personnel in the room didn't register her at all. She had arrived on base 2 hours earlier in an unmarked sedan. No fanfare, no escort. Just a quiet entry through the main gate with temporary credentials that raised no eyebrows. The guard had waved her through without a second glance. The admin clerk who processed her paperwork assumed she was a logistics liaison or maybe an intelligence analyst sent to observe. No one thought to ask why a lieutenant commander would arrive without ceremony or why her orders came directly from JSOC with half the document redacted. Jessica preferred it that way. She always had. She moved to the edge of the briefing cluster, studying the satellite imagery on the main screen. The valley was a nightmare, narrow, steep-walled, with limited egress routes and terrain that turned helicopters into sitting targets. The SEALs had pushed deep during a high-value target raid, but enemy reinforcements had flooded the area faster than anticipated. Now they were stranded, low on ammunition, medical supplies critically short, and extraction windows closing by the hour. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Around her, voices rose in frustration. A captain argued that sending in a rescue force would result in more casualties. A major insisted they wait for air support. But weather was closing in, storms predicted within 12 hours that would ground everything. An intelligence officer highlighted enemy anti-aircraft positions that made helicopter insertion suicide. Jessica listened without comment, her eyes tracing the contour lines on the map, following drainage patterns, identifying dead ground where teams could move unseen. She noted the enemy positions, the SEALs' last known coordinates, the natural choke points. Her mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating angles, timing, risks. A colonel near the front of the room slammed his palm on the table. "We need options. Real ones. Not theories." Silence settled, thick and uncomfortable. Jessica stepped forward. Her voice was calm, measured, carrying just enough to be heard without demanding attention. "There's a route." Heads turned. A few officers frowned, clearly not recognizing her. The colonel's eyes swept over her, pausing on the lack of visible rank, the unremarkable uniform. His expression hardened. "And you are?" "Lieutenant Commander Chen. I was asked to consult on extraction scenarios." The way she said it, simple, factual, gave nothing away. No pride, no defensiveness, just information. The colonel's jaw tightened. "Consulting is one thing, but unless you've been in that valley, I'm not sure what you can offer that we haven't already considered." A few officers exchanged glances. One smirked slightly, the kind of look that said, "Here we go." Another armchair tactician. Jessica didn't react. She simply moved closer to the map, her finger tracing a narrow corridor between 2 ridge lines. "This drainage runs parallel to their position," It's steep, but it offers concealment from the high ground. If you insert a small team here, she tapped a point 2 clicks west, they can move undetected and establish overwatch. From there, you create a corridor for the SEALs to collapse back through, while air assets suppress the flanks. The major shook his head. That drainage is a death trap. One machine gun at the exit and you've got nowhere to go. Jessica's eyes didn't leave the map. Only if the enemy knows you're coming. But if you time the insertion during the enemy's shift change around 0400 when they rotate positions, you have a 30-minute window where observation is weakest. The room went quiet. That kind of detail shift change timing, observation gaps wasn't something you learned from satellite imagery. That was the kind of knowledge earned through experience. Through watching enemy patterns night after night in the field. The colonel studied her more carefully now, suspicion mixing with curiosity. How do you know their shift patterns? Jessica straightened, her expression neutral. Because that's what I'd do if I were holding that terrain. It was an answer that revealed nothing and everything at once. The colonel opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at the map again, then back at her. You have a background in special operations? I've worked with various units. Vague. Deliberate. The kind of answer that invited no follow-up. An Air Force lieutenant spoke up from the side. Even if your route works, we still need someone who can coordinate with the SEALs on the ground, someone they trust. Someone who speaks their language. Jessica's gaze shifted to him. Steady and calm. I can do that. Laughter brief. Uncomfortable rippled through a few of the junior officers. The lieutenant's smile was patronizing. No offense, ma'am, but SEALs don't exactly take orders from people they don't know. Especially, not in the middle of a firefight. Jessica didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She simply said, "Then it's good. I'm not asking them to take orders." The statement hung in the air, layered with meaning the others couldn't quite decode. The colonel stared at her, something shifting behind his eyes, recognition, maybe, or the beginning of doubt about his own assumptions. Before he could respond, a radio transmission crackled through the speakers. Static, then a strained voice. Viper 6. This is Shadow 2-1. We're down to 40% ammunition. Request immediate resupply or extraction. We can't hold this position past tomorrow. The room tensed. The colonel's face darkened. He turned back to Jessica. Urgency overriding skepticism. If you think you can get them out, I'm listening. Jessica stepped fully into the light now. Her posture shifting slightly. Still calm, but with an authority that hadn't been visible before. I'll need a small team. No more than 6. Volunteers only. And I'll need full mission command once we're on the ground. The colonel's eyes narrowed. You're asking for a lot of trust from people who don't know you. Jessica met his gaze without blinking. I'm not asking for trust. I'm asking for time. You'll see soon enough whether I earned it. The words were quiet, but they carried weight. Not arrogance, just certainty. The kind that comes from having done this before, in places no one talks about, under circumstances no one writes reports on. The colonel studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You've got 12 hours to put a team together. After that, the weather shuts us down. Jessica nodded once. Understood. As the room began to disperse, officers moving back to their stations. A few lingered near Jessica. One, a Marine captain with skeptical eyes, crossed his arms. You really think you can pull this off? Jessica glanced at him, her expression softening just slightly. I think those SEALs deserve someone willing to try. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't confidence masking doubt. It was something quieter, duty, spoken like a promise she'd made long before this mission ever existed. The captain held her gaze for a moment, then nodded and walked away. Jessica turned back to the map, alone now except for the hum of equipment and the distant murmur of voices. She traced the valley one more time, her fingers pausing over the circled coordinates where 220 SEALs waited for help that might never come. Her jaw tightened. Not this time. She pulled a small notebook from her pocket, worn edges frayed, pages marked with faded ink. She flipped it open to a page near the back where names were written in careful script. Some crossed out, some circled, all remembered. She stared at the list for a long moment, then closed the notebook and slipped it back into her pocket. 12 hours. She would need every second. The team briefing room was smaller than the operations center, stripped down to essentials: metal chairs, projector screen, and a table covered in maps and equipment manifests. Jessica arrived early, setting up the mission brief with methodical precision. She arranged satellite photos in sequence, marked key terrain features, and laid out the proposed route with clear annotations. By the time the volunteers arrived, everything was ready. 6 operators filed in, 5 men, 1 woman. All experienced, all handpicked by their unit commanders as the best available on short notice. They carried themselves with the confident swagger of people who'd done hard things and lived to tell about it. Jokes bounced between them as they grabbed seats, the nervous energy of pre-mission adrenaline disguised as casual banter. Jessica stood at the front, waiting. The first to notice her was Chief Petty Officer Marcus Dalton, a SEAL with 15 years in the teams and a reputation for blunt honesty. His eyes swept over her, taking in the plane fatigues, the lack of unit insignia, the quiet presence. He frowned. "You're the mission lead?" Jessica nodded. "Lieutenant Commander Chen." Dalton exchanged a glance with the operator beside him. Staff Sergeant Kyle Brennan, an Army Ranger with a thick build and skeptical eyes. Brennan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "No offense, ma'am, but we were expecting someone from JSOC. Someone with direct experience in this kind of extraction." Jessica's expression didn't change. "I understand." That was all she said. No justification, no credentials listed, no attempt to prove herself before they'd even started. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Another operator, Petty Officer First Class Ethan Rivers, spoke up. He was younger than the others, mid-20s, with the eager intensity of someone still proving himself. "Ma'am, not trying to be disrespectful, but have you done something like this before?" Jessica met his eyes. "Yes." "With SEALs?" "Among others." Vague again. The pattern was becoming clear. She wasn't offering details, wasn't trying to win them over with stories or accolades. She was simply stating facts and leaving them to judge. It frustrated them. They wanted reassurance, wanted to know they weren't following someone out of their depth into a nightmare scenario. Brennan's skepticism hardened into something sharper. "Look, ma'am, no disrespect, but we're about to walk into a valley crawling with enemy fighters to pull out 220 SEALs who are barely holding on. That's not a training exercise. That's not theory. If you're the one calling shots, we need to know you've been in the shit before." Jessica's hands rested lightly on the table. Her voice remained calm, almost gentle. "I have." "Where?" She paused, just for a heartbeat. "Places I can't talk about." Groans rippled through the room. One operator muttered under his breath, "Great." Another ghost with a secret handshake. Dalton raised a hand, silencing the chatter. He leaned forward, studying Jessica more carefully. "Ma'am, I get that some things are classified. But if you want us to follow you into hell, we need something. Anything." Jessica considered this, her gaze steady. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, worn coin, a challenge coin, its edges smooth from years of handling. She set it on the table without ceremony. The operators leaned in, The coin was old, its design faded but still recognizable. One side bore the emblem of a unit so classified that most of them had only heard rumors it existed. The other side carried a motto in Latin that translated roughly to silent, swift, deadly. Brennan's eyes widened slightly. Rivers straightened in his chair. Even Dalton, who prided himself on never being impressed, stared at the coin for a long moment. "Where did you get that?" Dalton asked quietly. Jessica picked the coin back up and returned it to her pocket. "I earned it." The room shifted. Not to full trust, not yet, but to something closer to cautious respect. They still didn't know her story, but that coin told them enough. You didn't carry something like that unless you'd walked through fire and come out the other side. Still, doubt lingered. Brennan uncrossed his arms but kept his tone sharp. "All right. So you've got a fancy coin. That doesn't mean you know how to lead a team into a hot extraction." Jessica didn't react to the challenge. She simply turned to the map behind her and began the brief. "The SEALs are here." She tapped the coordinates. "Enemy forces have them boxed in on 3 sides. Air support is limited due to weather and anti-aircraft threats. A direct helicopter extraction is suicide. So we go in on foot." She traced the route she'd identified earlier. "This drainage offers concealment. It's steep, technical in places, but manageable. We insert here at 0400. Move through the drainage. Establish overwatch positions here and here. Then create a corridor for the SEALs to collapse back through." One of the operators, a Marine corporal named Diaz, raised a hand. "What about enemy patrols?" "That drainage is a natural avenue of approach. They'll have it covered." Jessica nodded. "They will. Which is why we time our movement during their shift change. Intelligence suggests they rotate positions between 0400 and 0430. That's our window." Diaz frowned. 30 minutes isn't much margin for error." "No," Jessica agreed. "It's not." The bluntness of her answer caught them off guard. She wasn't sugarcoating the danger, wasn't selling them false confidence. She was simply laying out the reality. Brennan shook his head. "And if we get spotted? If the timing's off by even 5 minutes?" Jessica's eyes held his. "Then we adapt. But sitting here debating worst-case scenarios won't change the fact that 220 SEALs are running out of time." The room went quiet. Dalton leaned back, exhaling slowly. "She's right. We can pick this apart all day, but those guys need help now." Brennan didn't respond immediately. He stared at the map, jaw working, clearly torn between doubt and duty. Finally, he muttered, "Fine. But if this goes sideways, it's on you, ma'am." Jessica's voice was soft but firm. "If it goes sideways, it's on all of us." The distinction mattered. She wasn't claiming sole credit or sole responsibility. She was making it clear they were a team, win or lose. It was a small thing, but it landed. A few of the operators' expressions softened slightly. As the briefing continued, Jessica walked them through contingencies, communication protocols, equipment checks. She answered every question with precision, never guessing, never hedging. When Rivers asked about escape routes if they got cut off, she identified 3 without hesitation, explaining the pros and cons of each. When Diaz questioned the loadout, she adjusted it on the spot, redistributing weight to account for the technical terrain. Slowly, grudgingly, they began to see competence beneath the quiet exterior. But respect was still fragile. And outside, in the corridor beyond the briefing room, voices carried. "Heard they put some lieutenant commander in charge." "Yeah? What's her background?" "No idea. Probably some staff officer playing hero." Laughter drifted through the door, not cruel, just dismissive. The kind of laughter born from assuming someone doesn't belong. Inside the room, the operators heard it. A few shifted uncomfortably. Jessica didn't react. She simply continued the brief, her voice steady, her focus unbroken. But Rivers noticed something. The way her hand rested on the table, fingers spread wide, perfectly still. Not tense, not trembling, just controlled. The kind of control that came from years of keeping emotions locked down when surrounded by doubt. He wondered, just for a moment, how many times she'd stood in rooms like this, hearing the same dismissive laughter, proving herself over and over again. The brief ended. The operators stood, gathering their gear. As they filed out, Brennan paused near the door. He glanced back at Jessica, who was rolling up the maps with the same methodical care she'd used to set them out. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "for what it's worth, I hope you prove me wrong." Jessica looked up, meeting his eyes. "So do I." It wasn't confidence. It was honesty. And somehow, that made it more believable. Brennan nodded and left. Jessica finished packing the maps, then stood alone in the empty room. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the base in shades of orange and gold. 12 hours had become 8. She checked her watch, then her rifle. An older model. Well-maintained but not flashy. She ran her hand along the stock, fingers tracing a small scar in the wood. A reminder. A promise. Then she walked out into the fading light, ready to prove that quiet strength could carry as much weight as loud confidence. Even if no one believed it yet. The staging area was organized, chaos gear being packed, weapons checked, radios tested. The team moved with practiced efficiency, each operator running through their pre-mission rituals. Brennan loaded magazines with methodical precision. Diaz adjusted her plate carrier for the 3rd time. Rivers paced, burning off nervous energy. Jessica worked alone in the corner, her movements economical and deliberate. She field-stripped her rifle, inspected each component, then reassembled it in under 90 seconds. She checked her optics, confirmed 0, and loaded her magazines with a rhythm that suggested she'd done this thousands of times. Dalton watched from across the staging area, arms crossed, evaluating. He'd been in the teams long enough to recognize the difference between someone going through motions and someone preparing for war. Jessica's hands never hesitated, never second-guessed. Every action flowed into the next with unconscious competence. He walked over, stopping a few feet away. "That's an old rifle." Jessica glanced up. "It works. Most operators use the newer systems. Better optics, lighter weight. I'm used to this one." Dalton studied the rifle more carefully. It was well maintained, but the stock showed years of wear, scratches, dings, and one particular groove near the trigger guard that looked like it had been there for decades. "How long you had it?" Jessica's fingers paused on the bolt. Just for a moment. "Long enough." Vague again. But this time, Dalton noticed something else. Near the pistol grip, barely visible, was a small engraving, initials and a date. The date was from 15 years ago. His eyebrows rose. 15 years ago, Jessica would have been, what? Early 20s at most? And she was already carrying a rifle important enough to engrave. Before he could ask, Rivers approached, holding a tactical map. "Ma'am, I had a question about the rally points." Jessica set her rifle down and took the map, spreading it on a nearby crate. Rivers pointed to a marked location. "If we get separated here, you said rally at the secondary position. But that's uphill from the valley floor. Won't that put us in the open?" Jessica shook her head. "Not if you use this ridge line." Her finger traced a subtle terrain feature most people would miss. "It's in defilade from the enemy positions. You'll have cover the entire approach." Rivers studied the map, then looked at her with confusion. How do you know that? The satellite imagery doesn't show that level of detail. Jessica's eyes stayed on the map. Because I've been there. The statement dropped into the conversation like a stone into still water. Rivers blinked. You've been to this valley? No. But I've been to ones like it. Terrain patterns repeat. If you've worked in enough mountains, you learn to read them. It made sense logically, but something in the way she said it, the certainty, the lack of doubt suggested more than just pattern recognition. It suggested memory. Dalton stepped closer, his interest sharpening. When were you deployed to this region? Jessica rolled the map up, handing it back to Rivers. I've had multiple deployments. Different units. Different missions. Always deflecting. Always vague. But the pieces were adding up in ways that didn't quite fit the image of a staff officer or logistics coordinator. Brennan joined them, carrying his pack. Ma'am, real quick, what's your preferred method for crossing danger areas at night? It was a test question, subtle but deliberate. The kind of thing you ask to see if someone had field experience or just book knowledge. Jessica answered without hesitation. Depends on terrain and enemy posture. If observation is limited, I prefer quick movement with minimal spacing. If they have night vision and overwatch, I use dead ground and natural obstacles to mask sound. Either way, you never cross where you plan to cross. You pick 3 points, make noise at the first 2, then cross at the third while they're focused elsewhere. Brennan's expression shifted. That wasn't a textbook answer. That was field craft, the kind learned through experience, through mistakes that cost lives if you got them wrong. He glanced at Dalton, who gave a small nod. The team was beginning to see it now. Small things. The way she checked her gear. Not nervous, not rushed, but with the automatic precision of muscle memory. The way she answered tactical questions without needing to think, her responses flowing from instinct rather than recall. Diaz approached, adjusting her helmet strap. Ma'am, I heard you speak multiple languages. Jessica paused in her equipment check. A few. Which ones? Arabic, Pashto, Dari, some Russian. Rivers' eyes widened. That's a lot. Jessica shrugged. You pick them up when you spend enough time in certain places. Certain places. Code for deployment zones. Code for years spent in regions where knowing the local language meant the difference between intelligence and ignorance, between life and death. Dalton's mind was working now, connecting dots. Multiple deployments. Classified background. Languages from active conflict regions. An old rifle with a sentimental engraving. A challenge coin from a unit that didn't officially exist. Ma'am, he said carefully. What was your last duty station before this? Jessica secured the last strap on her pack. I rotate between assignments. Nothing permanent. That's not an answer. She looked at him directly, her expression calm but firm. No, it's not. The message was clear. You can keep asking, but I'm not giving you more. It should have frustrated him. Instead, it intrigued him. People who deflected this consistently usually had good reasons. And those reasons were often classified at levels most operators would never see. As the team finished their final checks, a voice called out from the doorway. Lieutenant Commander Chen? A young Marine corporal stood at the entrance, holding a sealed envelope. This just came in for you, ma'am. From JSOC. Jessica took the envelope, nodded her thanks, and the corporal left. She opened it, scanned the contents, quickly, then folded it and tucked it into her pocket. Brennan tried to read her expression. Everything okay? Updated intelligence. Enemy patrol patterns have shifted slightly. We'll adjust our timing. By how much? 10 minutes earlier insertion. We'll brief the change on the ride out. She said it so casually, as if adjusting a mission timeline in real time was routine. And maybe, for her, it was. As they moved toward the vehicles, Dalton fell in step beside her. "Ma'am, can I ask you something off the record?" Jessica glanced at him. "You can ask. How many of these have you done? Extractions like this?" She was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that held weight. Then, softly, enough to know what can go wrong. It wasn't a brag. It was a warning, spoken like someone carrying ghosts. Dalton studied her profile, the set of her jaw, the controlled breathing, the way her eyes scanned the horizon, even here, on base, surrounded by friendlies. These weren't the habits of someone who'd done a deployment or two. These were the habits of someone who'd lived in the fight long enough that it became part of them. The vehicles were waiting. Engines idling. The team loaded up, checking comms, settling into the mental space before a mission. Jessica climbed into the lead vehicle, taking the seat beside the driver. As they pulled out of the staging area, Rivers, sitting behind her, noticed something. When Jessica adjusted her sleeve, pulling it down over her wrist, he caught a glimpse of ink. A tattoo. Coordinates. He frowned. Coordinates weren't decorative. They marked something specific. A place. A memory. A moment frozen in time. He wanted to ask but didn't. Some things, he was learning, were meant to stay private. The convoy rolled through the base gates and into the darkness beyond. The mission clock had started. In 6 hours, they'd be on the ground, moving through enemy territory toward 220 SEALs who had no idea help was coming. And leading them would be a woman most of them still didn't fully understand, whose past remained hidden behind careful words and vague answers. But with every passing minute, those answers seemed less important. Because competence, when it's real, speaks louder than credentials. And Jessica Chen was proving that with every decision, every quiet adjustment, every moment of steady, unshakable calm. The team might not know her story yet, but they were starting to trust her anyway. The helicopter's rotors chopped through the night air, the sound swallowed by mountains that rose like black teeth against a starless sky. Inside, the team sat in tense silence, each operator locked in their own pre-mission ritual. Dalton checked his NODs for the third time. Diaz ran through comms protocols in her head, lips moving silently. Rivers stared at the floor, breathing controlled, centering himself. Jessica sat near the door, eyes closed, but not sleeping. Her breathing was rhythmic, deliberate, 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out. The pattern of someone managing adrenaline, not succumbing to it. Her hand rested lightly on her rifle, fingers tracing the familiar scar in the stock the way someone might touch a wedding ring or a prayer bead. Brennan watched her from across the cabin. Even now, with mission insertion minutes away, she looked almost serene. No nervous energy, no last-minute equipment checks, no fidgeting, just stillness. The kind that came from having done this so many times that fear became background noise rather than a driving force. The crew chief's voice crackled through their headsets. 5 minutes. The team stirred, tightening straps, checking weapons, shifting into the mental space where training took over and doubt became irrelevant. Jessica opened her eyes, her gaze sweeping across each team member. She keyed her radio. Comms check. Sound off. One by one, they confirmed. Dalton. Brennan. Diaz. Rivers. 2 others, Martinez and Cole, both Marines who'd stayed quiet during the brief, but whose reputations spoke for themselves. Copy all, Jessica said. Remember the plan. We move fast, We move quiet, and we don't engage unless absolutely necessary. Our job is to get to those SEALs and get them out. Everything else is secondary." Heads nodded. The simplicity of her guidance cut through the complexity of what they were about to do. 2 minutes. The helicopter began its descent, dropping fast into the narrow valley. Through the open door, Jessica could see the terrain rushing up jagged rocks, sparse vegetation, shadows so deep they looked like voids. The pilot was good, keeping the bird low, using the terrain to mask their approach. 30 seconds. The team stood, forming up at the doors. Jessica was first in line, one hand gripping the overhead strap, the other on her rifle. The wind tore at her uniform, cold and sharp. Below, the landing zone materialized a small clearing barely large enough for the helicopter to hover. Go, go, go. Jessica dropped, boots hitting uneven ground, knees absorbing the impact. She moved immediately, rifle up, scanning her sector while the others piled out behind her. Within seconds, the helicopter was gone, climbing away into the darkness, its rotor wash fading until only the wind remained. Silence pressed in, heavy and absolute. Jessica raised a fist-hold position. The team froze, listening. Mountains had their own sounds, their own rhythms, and anything out of place would stand out like a scream. She waited a full minute, scanning with her NODs, watching for movement, for the telltale heat signature of someone watching them. Nothing. She signaled forward. They moved in a tactical column, spacing tight but controlled, each operator responsible for a sector. Jessica led, her movements fluid and precise, navigating the broken terrain with the ease of someone who'd walked through worse. The drainage she'd identified on the map appeared ahead, a narrow cut in the earth, steep-sided and choked, with loose rock. Dalton keyed his radio, voice barely a whisper. "That's tight. One bad step, and we're sliding." Jessica didn't slow. "Stay on the edges. Rock's more stable there." She was right. The edges, where vegetation clung to the sides, offered better footing. The team followed her path exactly, each step placed where hers had been. It was slow, technical work, the kind that required focus and trust. 15 minutes in, Rivers' foot slipped. He caught himself, but loose rock tumbled down the drainage, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet. Everyone froze. Jessica's hand shot up, hold. They waited, breaths held, scanning the high ground. If anyone had heard, if patrols were close, they'd know in the next 30 seconds. 10 seconds, 20, 30, nothing. Jessica signaled forward again, but slower now. The margin for error had shrunk. They were halfway through the drainage when the radio crackled, not their net, but enemy communications picked up by their tactical intercept equipment. Voices in a language most of the team didn't understand, but the tone was clear. Alert. Questioning. Jessica's jaw tightened. She keyed her radio, switching to a frequency only she and Dalton were on. They heard something. Patrols repositioning. Dalton's voice came back, tense. "How do you know?" "Because that's what I do." Before he could respond, she switched back to the team net. "Double time. Stay quiet, but we need to move." The pace increased, the team pushing harder, fatigue ignored. The drainage began to level out, opening into the broader valley floor. Jessica raised a fist again, signaling them into a security halt just inside the tree line. She pulled out a small tablet, accessing the real-time satellite feed JSOC was providing. The SEAL's last known position was 800 meters northeast, tucked against a rock face. But between here and there, thermal imaging showed multiple heat signatures, enemy patrols, at least 3 teams, moving in a pattern that suggested they were searching. Brennan moved up beside her, studying the screen. "They're looking for something," Or someone, Jessica murmured. The SEALs might have sent out a scout team. If they're compromised. A burst of gunfire shattered the night. Close. Maybe 400 meters away. The sound echoed off the valley walls, making it impossible to pinpoint exactly where it came from. Then, a radio transmission, American voice, strained and urgent. Shadow 2-1. This is Shadow 2-3. We're in contact. 5 enemy. Maybe more. We're pulling back to the rally point, but we've got wounded. Request immediate support. Jessica's hand moved before her mind finished processing. She keyed the command net. Shadow 2-1. This is Wraith 6. We're 800 meters south of your position. Hold your ground. Help is coming. There was a pause. Then a different voice, older, harder. Wraith 6, who the hell is this? Jessica's tone shifted, command authority crystallizing in her voice. Someone who's about to save your aunt. Ass. Mark your position with IR strobe. We're coming to you. Another pause. Then. Copy. Strobing now. Jessica turned to her team. Brennan was staring at her. Eyes wide. Wraith 6. She ignored the question. Dalton. Brennan. You're with me. Everyone else, establish a support position here. Cover our movement and be ready to pull us out if this goes sideways. Diaz stepped forward. Ma'am, you can't just run toward a firefight with 2 people. I'm not asking permission. Corporal. Jessica's voice was firm but not harsh. Those SEALs are pinned. Every second we debate is a second they don't have. Trust me or don't, but I'm going. She moved before anyone could argue further, Dalton and Brennan scrambling to keep up. They covered the first 200 meters fast, using shadows and dead ground, the sound of gunfire growing louder with each step. Jessica's movements were instinctive now. She didn't think about where to step or when to pause. Her body knew. Muscle memory built over years, in places just like this. At 600 meters, she dropped behind a boulder, scanning with her rifle. Through her scope, she could see muzzle flashes, enemy positions on a small rise, firing down at something she couldn't quite see. Then the IR strobe appeared, weak but visible through her NODs, marking the SEAL position in a shallow depression. They were boxed in, pinned from above with no clear escape route. Brennan's voice was tight. We need air support. CAS. Gunships. Something. Jessica shook her head. Weather's too bad. Ceiling's too low. We're it. Then what's the play? Jessica's mind worked through the problem with cold precision. 3 enemy positions. Maybe 15 fighters total. The SEALs were down in a depression, good cover but no mobility. If she could take out the overwatching positions, the SEALs could move. But 3 positions meant 3 separate engagements, and they didn't have the firepower for a frontal assault. Unless. Her eyes traced the terrain, finding angles, calculating distances. There. A rock outcrop 200 meters to the west. Elevated. Clear line of sight to all 3 enemy positions. Dalton, you and Brennan establish a support position here. Lay down suppressing fire on my signal. I'm going to that outcrop. Dalton grabbed her arm. That's 200 meters of open ground. You'll be exposed. Jessica's eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw something beneath the calm, not fear, but a kind of fierce determination that made his breath catch. I've made worse runs. Before he could argue, she moved. The first 50 meters were the hardest. Open, exposed, with gunfire ripping through the air above her. She sprinted in short bursts, dropping behind cover every 10 steps, controlling her breathing, ignoring the way bullets snapped past close enough to feel the displacement. At 100 meters, her boot caught on a root. She stumbled, went down hard on one knee. Pain shot through her leg, but she pushed through it, forcing herself back up, back into the run. Behind her, Dalton watched in disbelief. "She's insane." Brennan, despite himself, whispered, "She's incredible." Jessica reached the outcrop, throwing herself behind it as rounds impacted the rock inches from her head. Stone fragments peppered her face, drawing blood, but she barely noticed. She was already setting up, flipping out her bipod, settling into her shooting position. 4 counts in. Hold. 4 counts out. Her heart rate slowed. The chaos faded. The world narrowed to her scope, her breathing, her target. She found the first enemy position, a machine gun nest. 2 fighters. The gunner was firing in controlled bursts. The spotter was scanning with binos. Jessica adjusted for wind. For distance, 600 meters. Uphill angle. Adjust elevation by 1 MOA. She exhaled halfway and held. The shot broke clean. The spotter dropped. She cycled the bolt, found the gunner, fired again. The machine gun went silent. Dalton's voice crackled through her headset. "Holy shit. Did you just—" "Second position." Jessica cut him off, already shifting her aim. "Suppressing fire. Now." Dalton and Brennan opened up, their rifles barking in short bursts, forcing the enemy to take cover. In that brief window, Jessica found her next target. Third position, tucked behind rocks. She could only see the shooter's shoulder and part of his head. It was enough. She fired. The figure jerked and fell. Below, the SEALs seized the moment. They poured fire into the remaining enemy positions, their suppression coordinated and devastating. The enemy fighters, caught between Jessica's precision and the SEALs' aggression, broke contact, melting back into the darkness. Silence fell again, but different now, not tense. Relieved, Jessica sagged against the rock, adrenaline draining, leaving her hands trembling. She forced them still, forced herself to stand, to move back to Dalton and Brennan. When she reached them, both were staring at her like they'd just watched someone walk on water. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Brennan asked, his voice hollow with awe. Jessica didn't answer. She just keyed her radio. "Shadow 2-1, you're clear to move. Rally on my position." Minutes later, the SEALs appeared, 5 of them, moving fast despite their exhaustion. The lead man was a lieutenant, early 30s, with hard eyes and a presence that commanded respect. He reached Jessica's position and stopped dead. His eyes went wide. "Commander?" Jessica's expression didn't change. "Lieutenant." The others froze. Confusion rippled through Dalton, Brennan, and the rest of Jessica's team. "Commander?" The SEAL lieutenant's voice was thick with disbelief and something close to reverence. "We thought you were, we heard you'd—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Jessica's voice was soft. "Reports of my retirement were greatly exaggerated." The lieutenant stared at her for another beat. Then slowly, deliberately, he came to attention and saluted. It wasn't protocol. Officers didn't salute each other in the field. It was something else. Something deeper. Jessica returned the salute, then lowered her hand. "Status of your team?" The lieutenant snapped back to professional mode. 2 wounded, 1 critical. "We need to move him now, or we're going to lose him." Jessica nodded. "Then let's move." As they began consolidating positions, preparing for the pushback to extract the main SEAL force, Dalton pulled Brennan aside. "Did he just call her commander?" Brennan's face was pale. "I think he did. But she's a lieutenant commander. Why would a SEAL lieutenant salute like—" He stopped, the pieces finally clicking into place. Brennan finished the thought, his voice barely a whisper. Because she's not just any lieutenant commander. They both turned to watch Jessica, who was now coordinating with the SEAL lieutenant. Her movements efficient, her orders clear, her presence suddenly impossible to ignore. For the first time, they understood. They weren't following some staff officer playing operator. They were following a legend who'd walked away from the spotlight. And now, whether she wanted it or not, that legend was coming back into the light. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one. The consolidated team moved through the darkness with renewed urgency. Jessica led, the SEAL lieutenant who'd introduced himself as LT Carson at her side. Behind them, Dalton and Brennan carried the critically wounded SEAL on an improvised litter, while the rest of the team provided security. They were 600 meters from the main SEAL position when Carson broke the tense silence. "Commander, the teams are going to lose their minds when they see you." Jessica kept her eyes forward, scanning the terrain. "They don't need to know who I am. They just need to know help arrived." Carson shook his head, a grim smile crossing his face. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you saved the 220 at Kandahar Ridge. You're the reason half of SEAL Team 3 came home from Ramadi. Every SEAL worth his trident knows the name Wraith." Behind them, Brennan nearly stumbled. Dalton's head snapped up, his eyes locking on Jessica's back. Wraith. Not a call sign she'd used for this mission. A call sign with history, with legend attached to it. Rivers, who'd caught up with the main group, keyed his radio quietly to Diaz. "Are you hearing this?" Diaz's response was shaky. "I'm hearing it. I'm not believing it." Jessica's jaw tightened, but she didn't slow down. "That was a long time ago, Lieutenant. Different command structure. Different mission set. Doesn't matter, ma'am. What you did, what you've done, that doesn't just disappear, because time passes." They crested a small rise, and Jessica raised her fist, signaling a halt. Below, in a rocky depression, she could see the IR strobes marking the main SEAL position. 220 operators, dug in, low on ammunition, waiting for an extraction that looked increasingly impossible. Jessica pulled out her tablet, studying the terrain. The SEALs were in a natural defensive position, but it was also a trap if the enemy decided to press. The valley walls rose steeply on 3 sides, and the only exit was through a narrow pass currently covered by enemy machine guns. Carson pointed to the pass. "That's our problem. 2 PKMs, maybe an RPG team. Every time we try to move, they light us up. We've lost 3 men trying to push through." Jessica zoomed in on the satellite feed, watching the heat signatures of the enemy positions. They were smart positioned for interlocking fields of fire, with good cover and clear sightlines to the valley floor. But they were also predictable. She traced a finger along the ridgeline above the enemy positions. "There's a route. Steep. Technical. But it puts you above them." Carson followed her finger. "That's a cliff face. Ma'am. We'd need climbing gear. And even then, I'll go." Every head turned toward her. Brennan stepped forward. "Ma'am, you can't be serious. That's a solo climb in the dark, and even if you make it up, you'll be alone against entrenched positions." Jessica's eyes didn't leave the screen. "I won't be alone. Dalton, you and your team establish a support position here." She tapped a spot on the map. "When I reach the top, you provide suppressing fire on the lower positions. That'll keep their heads down while I work the upper ones." "Work them how?" Dalton's voice was sharp with concern. Jessica looked at him directly. "The same way I did at Kandahar Ridge." The reference hit like a physical blow. Kandahar Ridge. A battle that had entered special operations folklore. A female sniper, only known as Wraith, had climbed a mountain under fire, established an overwatch position, and held off an enemy force 3 times the size of the SEAL team she was protecting. She'd fired over 400 rounds in a 6-hour engagement, neutralizing more than 30 enemy fighters with precision so devastating that the enemy eventually retreated, convinced they were facing a much larger force. The mission reports had been classified, but the story had spread anyway. Whispered in team rooms, told in training cadres as an example of what one operator with skill and courage could accomplish. And now that operator was standing in front of them, preparing to do it again. Diaz's voice was small. "Ma'am, that was you." Jessica didn't answer. She was already stripping unnecessary gear from her kit, lightening her load for the climb. She kept her rifle, her sidearm, extra magazines, and a small med kit. Everything else stayed behind. Carson watched her, something like wonder in his expression. "The story says you held that position for 6 hours. That you didn't miss a shot." Jessica paused, her hands still on her gear. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, heavy with memory. "I missed. Twice. Both times. Good men paid the price." The weight of that statement silenced everyone. She wasn't boasting. She was remembering. Carrying the burden of those 2 misses, the way some people carry scars. She straightened, slinging her rifle across her back. "I'm not a legend. I'm just a sniper who's had to make too many of these shots. And right now, 220 men are counting on me to make more." She looked at each team member in turn. "If I don't make it back, Dalton has command. Get those SEALs out. That's the mission." Before anyone could protest, she moved. The cliff face was worse than it looked on the map. Loose rock, minimal handholds, and a grade steep enough that one wrong move meant a fall that would end in broken bones or worse. But Jessica climbed with the controlled aggression of someone who'd done this before. Her fingers finding holds by feel, her boots digging into tiny cracks. Halfway up, her hand slipped. She swung out, dangling by one arm, 60 feet of empty air below her. For 3 heartbeats, she hung there, breath controlled, mind focused. Then she found a foothold, pushed up, and kept climbing. Below, Brennan watched through his scope, his heart in his throat. She's going to fall. But she didn't. 20 minutes later, Jessica pulled herself over the top of the ridge, rolling onto solid ground. She lay still for a moment, catching her breath, then crawled forward to assess the enemy positions. They were exactly where she'd predicted. 2 machine gun nests, 300 meters apart, with an RPG team in between. Maybe 12 fighters total. They were alert but not panicked, confident in their superior position. They had no idea someone was above them. Jessica set up behind a large boulder, establishing her shooting position with the methodical care of a master craftsman preparing for critical work. She checked her rifle, confirmed her dope for the distance and elevation, and settled into her breathing pattern. Then she keyed her radio. "Dalton, I'm in position. On my mark. Begin suppression." "Copy. Standing by." Jessica's scope settled on the first machine gunner. Through the optic, she could see him clearly, late 20s, focused on the valley below, unaware that death was looking at him from above. She exhaled halfway. Held. Mark. The valley erupted with gunfire as Dalton's team opened up. The enemy positions immediately returned fire, tracers streaking through the darkness. In that chaos, Jessica fired. The first gunner dropped. She cycled the bolt, smooth and fast, and found the second gunner, who was turning to see what happened to his partner. She fired again. He fell. The RPG team was scrambling now, trying to reorient to the new threat. Jessica put 2 rounds into the man holding the launcher, then shifted to the loader. 4 shots. 4 hits. all in under 10 seconds. The remaining enemy fighters panicked. Some tried to run. Others returned fire blindly at the ridge, rounds impacting far from Jessica's position. She worked through them, methodically, calmly, each shot precisely aimed, each trigger press deliberate. When the last fighter fell, silence returned to the valley. Jessica remained in position, scanning for additional threats, but the fight was over. She keyed her radio. Positions neutralized. Path is clear. Below, in the sealed defensive position, men were standing, staring up at the ridge in disbelief. Some had served long enough to recognize what they'd just witnessed. Others were too new to understand the full significance. But Carson knew. He stood in the center of his men, his voice carrying across the formation. "That's Wraith. That's Commander Jessica Chen. And she just saved every one of us." The name rippled through the SEAL teams like electricity. Men who'd heard the stories, but never believed them. Men who'd thought Wraith was a myth, an exaggeration, a composite of multiple operators turned into one legendary figure. Now they knew the truth. One SEAL, a young petty officer who couldn't have been more than 22, turned to his teammate with tears in his eyes. "She's real. Holy shit, she's real." In Jessica's team, the realization was complete. Everything made sense now. The vague answers, the classified background, the casual competence, the old rifle with the sentimental engraving, the challenge coin from a unit that didn't exist. Rivers sat down heavily, his voice hollow. "We've been doubting a Medal of Honor recipient." Diaz shook her head. "We've been doubting a living legend." Brennan's face was pale. "We've been idiots." Dalton just stared up at the ridge where Jessica was now climbing down, her movements controlled despite obvious exhaustion. When she reached the valley floor, Carson met her halfway. He came to attention again, and this time, every SEAL in sight followed his lead. 220 operators, standing at attention in the middle of a combat zone, saluting a woman most of them had only heard about in whispered stories. Jessica froze, clearly uncomfortable with the display. At ease. We're still in enemy territory. But Carson held his salute a moment longer. "Ma'am, with all due respect, some things are worth the risk." Slowly, deliberately, Jessica returned the salute. Then she lowered her hand and her voice shifted back to mission mode. "We have a narrow window for extraction. Enemy reinforcements will be here within the hour. We need to move now." The professionalism, the immediate pivot back to the mission, only deepened the respect. As the SEALs began organizing for movement, word continued to spread. The quiet woman who'd led the rescue team wasn't just a random officer. She was a Tier 1 operator, a sniper whose skills had been honed in the darkest, most classified missions of the past 2 decades. A commander who'd turned down promotions to stay in the field, who'd walked away from public recognition to keep doing the work that mattered. Dalton approached her as she checked her rifle. "Ma'am, why didn't you tell us?" Jessica didn't look up from her weapon. "Would it have mattered?" "Yes, we wouldn't have." He stopped, realizing the trap in his own words. Jessica glanced at him, her expression softening slightly. "Exactly. You wouldn't have questioned me. You wouldn't have evaluated my decisions based on their merit. You would have followed blindly because of a reputation." She returned to her rifle check. "I needed you to trust the plan, not the name." It made sense in a way that was both humbling and profound. Brennan joined them, his voice quiet. "For what it's worth, ma'am, I'm sorry for doubting you." Jessica stood, slinging her rifle. "Don't be. Doubt keeps you alive. Blind faith gets you killed." She looked at both of them. You questioned because you cared about the mission. That's what good operators do. The forgiveness in her words, the understanding, made their earlier mockery feel even heavier. As the teams prepared to move out, Jessica took a moment to look at the ridge where she'd just fought. Her hand unconsciously moved to her wrist, to the coordinates tattooed there. Carson noticed. Kandahar Ridge? She nodded. The place where I learned what it costs to be the last line of defense. And you came back. You're still doing it. Jessica's eyes held the weight of years. Because if not me, then who? If not now, then when? It wasn't heroic posturing. It was the quiet statement of someone who'd accepted a burden and refused to put it down, even when the world told her she'd earned the right to rest. The extraction began. 220 SEALs moving through the pass that Jessica had cleared, each one looking up at that ridge as they passed, understanding that they owed their lives to the woman walking point. And behind them, 6 operators, who'd started the mission doubting her now, followed with absolute conviction. The legend wasn't just real. She was leading them home. The extraction point was a flat stretch of ground 3 kilometers from the SEAL defensive position, the closest area large enough for multiple helicopters to land safely. The teams moved in tactical columns, security out, medics working on the wounded as they walked. Jessica rotated between the front and rear of the formation, her eyes constantly scanning, her rifle ready. They were halfway there when the radio crackled with enemy traffic. Lots of it. The intercept equipment picked up multiple transmissions, voices urgent, coordinates being passed, units being repositioned. Jessica keyed her command net. They know we're moving. They're trying to cut us off. Carson moved up beside her. How much time do we have? Jessica checked her watch. Calculated movement speeds. Likely enemy routes. 15 minutes. Maybe 20 if we're lucky. And if they catch us in the open? Her jaw tightened. They won't. But doubt crept into even the most confident faces. 26 operators and 220 exhausted SEALs against unknown enemy numbers in terrain that favored ambush. The math wasn't good. Jessica stopped the formation, calling the senior leaders forward. Carson, Dalton, and 3 SEAL team chiefs gathered around her. She pulled out her tablet, showing them the terrain ahead. There's a natural choke point here. Narrow pass. Rocky sides. If the enemy reaches it before us, we're in trouble. One of the SEAL chiefs, a grizzled master chief with 25 years in, studied the map. Can we go around? Not without adding an hour to our movement. The helos won't wait that long. Then we push through and pray. Jessica shook her head. Prayer's not a plan, Master Chief. She zoomed in on the choke point. But speed is. If we can reach that pass before them, I can hold it long enough for everyone to get through. Dalton's eyes widened. You're talking about a rear guard action. Solo. I'm talking about buying time. Ma'am, that's suicide. Jessica's eyes met his, and he saw something in them that made his protest die in his throat. She'd made this decision before. Maybe multiple times. And she'd survived. Carson spoke carefully. Commander, we don't leave people behind. That's not how we operate. You're not leaving me behind, Lieutenant. I'm staying by choice. And once everyone's through, I'll collapse back to the extract point. But someone has to hold that pass, and I'm the best shooter here. It wasn't arrogance. It was just fact. The Master Chief studied her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. If you're staying, I'm staying with you. 2 more SEAL chiefs volunteered immediately. Jessica started to refuse, then stopped herself. Pride had no place in combat. If they wanted to help, she'd be stupid to turn them down. All right? 4 of us hold the pass. Everyone else pushes to extraction at double time. Questions? There were none. Just grim acceptance. As the formation began moving faster, word spread about what Jessica was planning. Operators who'd questioned her competence hours ago now watched her with something approaching awe. She wasn't just leading. She was willing to sacrifice herself to ensure they all made it home. Rivers approached her as they neared the choke point. "Ma'am." "Thank you." Jessica glanced at him, confused. "For what?" "For not giving up on us. Even when we gave you every reason to." She stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "I never gave up on you. I just needed you to see past your doubts." She gestured to the seals ahead. "Same way they need to see past theirs. Fear makes us question. Courage is acting despite the questions." The simple wisdom of it struck Rivers hard. He nodded, unable to speak, and returned to his position in the column. The choke point appeared ahead exactly as Jessica had described. A narrow gap between two rock walls, maybe 20 meters wide, with good cover on both sides. Perfect for defense, terrible for anyone trying to push through. Jessica and the 3 SEAL chiefs peeled off, taking positions on either side of the pass. The Master Chief set up with a light machine gun. The other 2 chiefs established overlapping fields of fire. Jessica moved to the highest point, where she had clear sightlines back down the valley. As the last of the SEALs filed through, Carson stopped beside her position. "Commander, I'm not comfortable leaving you here." Jessica didn't take her eyes off her scope. "Noted. Now move." "Lieutenant, that's an order." Carson hesitated, then nodded sharply. "Don't make me come back for you." "Wouldn't dream of it." He moved through the pass, and then they were alone. 4 operators against whatever was coming. The Master Chief settled behind his machine gun, his voice carrying a dry humor. "Hell of a way to spend a Thursday." Jessica couldn't help a small smile. "Beats PowerPoint." The other chiefs chuckled, the tension breaking just enough to keep them sharp without tipping into panic. They didn't have to wait long. The first enemy element appeared 400 meters out, a squad-sized element, moving fast, trying to reach the pass before it could be reinforced. Jessica counted 12 fighters, armed with AKs and at least 1 PKM. She keyed her radio to the 3 chiefs. "Contact. 12 enemy, 400 meters. Let them close to 200, then we light them up." 3 clicks acknowledged. Jessica settled into her position, controlling her breathing, watching through her scope as the enemy moved closer. They were well trained, using proper spacing, checking corners. These weren't militia. These were professionals. At 250 meters, the enemy leader raised his hand, signaling a halt. He'd seen something, maybe a reflection, maybe movement. His head turned, scanning the pass. Jessica made a decision. Engaging now. She fired. The enemy leader dropped. The Master Chief's machine gun roared to life, tracers ripping through the enemy formation. The other chiefs opened up with their rifles. Controlled bursts, each shot deliberate. The enemy scattered, diving for cover, returning fire blindly. But they were caught in the open, with nowhere to go. Jessica worked through them methodically, her shots precise, even as rounds impacted near her position. In 90 seconds, it was over. The survivors retreated, dragging wounded, leaving bodies behind. Jessica scanned for additional threats. Clear. But that was just the vanguard. Main force will be here in 5 minutes. The Master Chief checked his ammunition. How much longer do we need to hold? Jessica glanced at her watch. 3 minutes. Until the last helo lifts off. 3 minutes. We can do 3 minutes. But the universe had other plans. The next wave came from 2 directions, one group from the valley, another from the ridge line above. 40 fighters, maybe more, with heavy weapons and a clear intent to overwhelm through sheer numbers. Jessica's mind raced. 2 fronts. Limited ammunition. No support. She made the call. Master Chief, you and Roberts take the valley approach. Jenkins, you're with me on the ridge. We hold for 2 minutes. Then we collapse back through the pass in sequence. Roberts goes first. Then Jenkins. Then Master Chief. I'll cover the withdrawal. The Master Chief started to argue, but Jessica cut him off. That's an order. You're more valuable getting back to your teams than dying here with me. He held her gaze for a moment. Retry B. Continue, then nodded. 2 minutes. Then we all go home. The battle that followed would be talked about for years. Jessica and Chief Jenkins engaged the ridge fighters with devastating accuracy. Every shot counted. Every target she selected was either a leader or a heavy weapons operator, high-value targets whose removal created chaos in the enemy formation. Below, the Master Chief and Chief Roberts held the valley approach with controlled aggression, their fire so precise that the enemy faltered, unable to gain ground. But the numbers were overwhelming. For every enemy Jessica dropped, 2 more appeared. Her ammunition dwindled. 50 rounds. 40. 30. 1 minute, she called. The enemy sensed weakness. They pushed harder. Fire intensifying. Roberts, go. Chief Roberts bounded back through the pass, still firing, covering the others. Jenkins, go. Chief Jenkins followed, his rifle empty, transitioning to his sidearm as he moved. Master Chief, go. The Master Chief laid down a final burst of machine gun fire, then grabbed his weapon and ran. Jessica was alone now. 20 rounds left. She fired in rapid succession, dropping threats, forcing the enemy to take cover. 15 rounds. 10. Then her rifle ran dry. She transitioned to her sidearm, rising from her position, firing as she moved. Rounds snapped past her, close enough to feel. One grazed her shoulder, hot and sharp, but she kept moving. She reached the pass, still firing, backing through it. On the other side, the 3 chiefs were waiting, weapons up, covering her withdrawal with everything they had left. Jessica burst through, stumbling, and they caught her. Run! They ran, the 4 of them, as the pass erupted with enemy fire behind them. But they were through. They'd held. 2 minutes later, they reached the extraction point. The helicopters were lifting off, the last one hovering, door gunners providing cover fire. Jessica and the chief sprinted for it, legs burning, lungs screaming. Hands reached down, pulling them aboard. The helicopter lifted, enemy fire pinging off its armor, and then they were clear, climbing into the night sky. Jessica collapsed against the bulkhead, chest heaving, blood seeping through her uniform where the round had grazed her. A SEAL medic moved to treat her, but she waved him off. Check the others first. Around her, SEALs were staring. Not with curiosity, with reverence. The Master Chief, sitting across from her, met her eyes. That was the gutsiest thing I've ever seen, and I've been doing this for 25 years. Jessica's smile was tired. Just another Thursday, Master Chief. He laughed, a sound of pure relief and respect. If you ever need a reference, Commander, I'm your man. As the helicopter flew toward safety, Carson made his way through the crowded cabin. He knelt beside Jessica, his face serious. Ma'am, when we land, there's going to be questions. The battalion commander, probably someone from JSOC. They're going to want to know who you are and what you've done. Jessica closed her eyes. I know. Your secret's out, ma'am. Everyone knows now. She opened her eyes, looking at the faces surrounding her. SEALs she'd just saved. Operators who doubted her, and now would follow her anywhere. Then I guess we'll deal with that when we land. Carson nodded slowly. For what it's worth. I'm glad the world's going to know the truth. Jessica didn't respond. She just watched the darkness outside the helicopter, carrying with her the weight of what had been revealed and what still lay ahead. The legend of Wraith had just become Jessica Chen, and nothing would ever be the same. The helicopters touched down at the forward operating base, just as dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The rotors kicked up swirls of dust that glowed in the early light, and as the aircraft settled, personnel began spilling out, exhausted, wounded, but alive. Jessica was among the last to exit. Her shoulder had been bandaged on the flight, a field dressing wrapped tight over the graze wound. Her uniform was torn, stained with dirt and blood, her face marked with cuts from stone fragments. She moved stiffly, favoring her left leg where she'd twisted it during the climb. But her eyes were alert, already scanning the assembled personnel on the tarmac. A crowd had gathered. Word had spread faster than the helicopters had flown. Radio chatter, encrypted messages, frantic calls between command centers. By the time the rescue force landed, half the base knew that 220 SEALs had been extracted against impossible odds, and that the person who'd led the rescue was someone no one had expected. The base commander, Colonel Marcus Reeves, stood at the front of the assembled personnel. He was a career infantry officer, respected but by the book, someone who valued protocol and chain of command above all else. His expression was difficult to read as Jessica approached, not quite angry, not quite impressed, just processing. Jessica came to a stop in front of him and rendered a salute. Her arm was steady despite the exhaustion. Reeves returned the salute. Then his eyes swept over her. "Lieutenant Commander Chen, we need to talk." "Yes, sir. My office." 30 minutes. "Get yourself checked by medical first." Jessica nodded. "Understood, sir." As Reeves turned to leave, the SEALs began disembarking from the other helicopters. They moved in small groups, helping wounded, carrying gear. But their eyes kept drifting toward Jessica. She stood alone on the tarmac, a solitary figure against the growing light, and the weight of their attention was almost physical. Carson was the first to approach. He walked across the tarmac with deliberate steps, his team following behind him. When he reached Jessica, he stopped at attention. For a moment, nothing happened. The base seemed to hold its breath. Then Carson's hand snapped up in a crisp salute. Not the casual salute of routine military courtesy. This was something else. His arm was rigid, his hand perfectly positioned, and he held it there longer than protocol required, longer than was comfortable, long enough that everyone watching understood this wasn't about rank. It was about respect. Jessica's throat tightened. She returned the salute, her own hand rising with careful precision, and for 3 heartbeats they stood there, officer to officer, warrior to warrior. When Carson finally lowered his hand, his voice carried across the quiet tarmac. "Ma'am, it has been the honor of my career to serve beside you." Jessica's voice was soft. "The honor was mine, Lieutenant." But Carson wasn't finished. He turned to his team, still standing in formation behind him, and raised his voice. "This is Commander Jessica Chen. Call sign Wraith. She saved my life tonight. She saved all our lives." One by one, Carson's team came to attention. 5 SEALs, battered and exhausted, rendering salutes with the same deliberate respect their lieutenant had shown. Jessica returned each one, her composure beginning to crack at the edges. Then the Master Chief stepped forward. The grizzled veteran who'd held the pass beside her walked with the weight of his years, his face lined with scars and stories. He didn't say anything. He simply came to attention and saluted. Jessica returned it, and she saw something in his eyes, recognition from one warrior to another, understanding that transcended rank or branch or gender. He'd seen what she could do. He'd fought beside her. And that bond was unbreakable. "Hooyah, Commander," he said quietly, using the SEAL battle cry not as a shout but as a benediction. "Hooyah, Master Chief." He lowered his salute and stepped aside, but he didn't leave. He stood there, at attention, as if waiting for something. And then it began. Another SEAL approached. Then another. Then 3 more. They came in 1s and 2s and small groups, forming a line that stretched across the tarmac. Each one came to attention. Each one saluted. Each one held that salute just a moment longer than necessary, their eyes conveying what words couldn't. "Thank you. You saved us. We owe you our lives." Jessica stood rooted in place, returning every salute, her arm beginning to ache from the repetition but refusing to show it. Tears threatened at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Not here. Not now." 50 SEALs saluted, then 100, then more. The line seemed endless, a procession of gratitude that went on and on. Each man stopping to offer his respect before moving to join the growing formation behind the Master Chief. Dalton watched from the side, his own team gathered around him. Brennan's face was pale, his earlier skepticism buried under the weight of what he was witnessing. Rivers had tears streaming openly down his face. Diaz stood with her hand over her heart, her chest tight with emotion. "We doubted her," Rivers whispered. "God, we doubted her." Dalton's voice was rough. "We were fools." Martinez, one of the Marines who'd stayed quiet through most of the mission, shook his head slowly. "No. We were human. We judged what we saw instead of what we couldn't see." He paused. "But now we see." On the tarmac, the salutes continued. Jessica's arm was shaking now. Not from weakness, but from the overwhelming emotion of what was happening. This wasn't about her. It was about them. It was about every operator who'd ever been underestimated. Every quiet professional who did the work without seeking the spotlight. Every person who'd ever been judged by appearance instead of capability. When the last SEAL had saluted and taken his place in the formation, 220 men stood at attention. A sea of desert camouflage and battle-worn faces, all focused on one woman who'd asked for nothing but had given everything. The Master Chief's voice cut through the silence. "Detail. Present arms." As 220 hands snapped up in unison. The sound was like thunderboots striking concrete, fabric rustling, the sharp crack of hands meeting foreheads. The formation held the salute, and the base seemed to stop. Personnel who'd been walking to their duty stations froze. Officers who'd been heading to morning briefings turned to watch. Even Colonel Reeves, walking toward his office, stopped and looked back. Jessica stood before them, small and alone, her uniform torn, her face marked by battle, and she returned the salute one final time. Her arm was perfectly steady now, all trace of exhaustion gone, replaced by a strength that came from somewhere deeper than muscle or training. This was duty. This was honor. This was the price and the privilege of service. She held the salute for 5 full seconds, then lowered her hand. The formation lowered theirs in perfect unison. Silence stretched, profound and sacred. Then, from somewhere in the formation, a single voice called out, "Hooyah, Wraith." The cry was taken up immediately. "Hooyah!" 220 voices, shouting as one, the sound rolling across the base like a wave. "Hooyah!" Jessica's composure finally broke. Not dramatically, she didn't collapse or sob, but a single tear tracked down her cheek, cutting a clean line through the dust and dirt. She lifted her hand in a small gesture of acknowledgement, then lowered her eyes, overwhelmed. Carson stepped forward, his voice quieter now but carrying authority. Fall out. Get yourselves to medical. Get some food. Get some rest. You've earned it. The formation dissolved, but the SEALs didn't rush away. They moved slowly, in small clusters, many of them stopping to look back at Jessica one more time, as if committing this moment to memory. Dalton approached with his team. For a moment, none of them knew what to say. Finally, Brennan stepped forward. His voice cracked slightly. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. I questioned your leadership. I doubted your abilities. Jessica raised a hand, stopping him. "Staff Sergeant, you did exactly what you should have done. You evaluated the situation, asked hard questions, and made me prove myself. That's not something to apologize for. But we were wrong." Jessica's eyes softened. "You were cautious. There's a difference." She looked at each member of her team. "And when the mission mattered, you followed, you trusted, you fought. That's what I'll remember." Rivers stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. "Ma'am, it's been the privilege of my career to serve under your command. Even for just one mission." Jessica reached out and squeezed his shoulder briefly. "Then, make sure the next operator you doubt gets the same chance I got. Judge them by their actions, not your assumptions." It was a teaching moment disguised as forgiveness, and it hit them all like a hammer. Diaz spoke up, her voice steady. "Ma'am, if you ever need a team again, we're yours. No questions asked." Jessica smiled. Small but genuine. "I'll remember that, Corporal." As her team moved away to join the larger crowd heading toward medical and debriefing, Jessica found herself alone again. The sun had fully risen now, bathing the base in warm light, and the sounds of normal operations were beginning to resume. But the tarmac where 220 SEALs had stood at attention felt different. Sacred, somehow. Marked by something that couldn't be seen but could absolutely be felt. A voice spoke from behind her. That was remarkable. Jessica turned to find a woman in her late 50s, wearing the rank of a Navy captain. Her uniform was immaculate, her bearing that of someone who'd spent decades in service. Her eyes held understanding, the kind that came from experience, not observation. "Captain," Jessica acknowledged. "Captain Michelle Torres. I'm the naval liaison for special operations in this region." She stepped closer, studying Jessica with open curiosity. "I've read your file. Or rather, I've read the parts of your file that aren't redacted. Which, I'll be honest, isn't much." Jessica didn't respond. Waiting. Torres smiled slightly. "But what I have read is impressive. 4 Navy Crosses. 2 Silver Stars. A Medal of Honor that you refuse to accept publicly." Jessica's jaw tightened. "That last one isn't common knowledge, ma'am." "No, it's not. But I have high clearance and a need to know." Torres's expression grew more serious. "You saved 220 men tonight. Before that, you saved countless others in operations that will never see the light of day. You're a national treasure, Commander. A legend in the special operations community. I'm just a sniper who's had to make difficult shots, ma'am." Torres laughed, a sound of genuine amusement. "That's exactly what someone like you would say." She paused. "There's going to be a ceremony. A proper recognition. The SEALs want it. Command wants it. And frankly, you've earned it." Jessica's discomfort was visible. "Ma'am, I'd prefer." "I know what you'd prefer, Commander. You'd prefer to slip away. Back into the shadows. Back to whatever classified assignment you came from. But that's not going to happen this time." Torres' voice gentled. "You've inspired something here. Those men will never forget what you did. The story will spread, whether you want it to or not. The only question is whether you'll be there to accept the recognition with grace, or whether you'll make them chase you." Jessica closed her eyes briefly. She'd known this was coming. From the moment Carson had recognized her, she'd known her anonymity was over. "When?" she asked quietly. "Tomorrow. 1,800 hours. Full dress uniforms. The SEALs, your team, senior command. It won't be public, won't be media-facing, but it will be real." Jessica nodded slowly. "Understood, ma'am." Torres studied her for a moment longer. "Commander, I've been in the Navy for 32 years. I've seen a lot of remarkable things. But what you did tonight, the tactical brilliance, the physical courage, the leadership, that's something I'll tell my grandchildren about." She came to attention and rendered a salute. "It's an honor to serve in the same Navy as you." Jessica returned the salute, her throat tight. As Torres walked away, Jessica was left alone on the tarmac. The sun warm on her face, her body aching with exhaustion, her mind still processing what had just happened. She looked down at her hands. They were steady now, the trembling gone. These hands had held a rifle for 18 hours straight. These hands had fired over 200 rounds with precision that had saved lives. These hands had climbed a cliff in darkness and held a pass against overwhelming odds. But they were just hands. She was just a person. The legend they'd saluted, the warrior they'd honored, that was real, yes, but it wasn't superhuman. It was just the accumulation of years, of training, of hard decisions made in impossible moments. She'd never wanted to be a legend. She'd only wanted to do the job. But sometimes, she was learning, the job made legends of people whether they wanted it or not. A medic approached hesitantly. "Ma'am? Colonel Reeves asked me to make sure you got checked out before your meeting." Jessica nodded. "Lead the way." As she followed the medic toward the medical tent, she passed groups of personnel who stopped to watch her. Some saluted. Others just stared. A few whispered her name, her real name. Not her call sign, testing how it felt to say it out loud. Jessica kept her eyes forward, her bearing professional. But inside, something had shifted. For years, she'd been a ghost. Wraith. A name without a face, a legend without substance. Now she was real. Visible. Known. And she wasn't sure whether that was liberation or exposure. The morning sun climbed, higher, casting shorter shadows. And Jessica Chen walked forward into a future she hadn't chosen but would have to navigate regardless. Behind her, on that sacred tarmac, the echo of 220 salutes still lingered in the air. Colonel Reeves' office was sparse and functional: metal desk, filing cabinets, a map of the region covering one wall. Jessica stood at attention in front of his desk, her uniform cleaned but still showing the wear of combat. The shoulder bandage was visible beneath her blouse, a white patch that drew the eye. Reeves sat behind his desk, hands folded, his expression unreadable. He'd been silent for 30 seconds, just studying her. And Jessica knew this technique. Let the silence build pressure. See if the person breaks, starts talking, tries to fill the void. She didn't. She just stood there, patient, waiting. Finally, Reeves spoke. "At ease, Commander." Jessica shifted to parade rest, hands behind her back. Reeves leaned back in his chair. "Do you have any idea what kind of chaos you've caused?" "Sir? In the last 12 hours, I've received calls from JSOC, from Naval Special Warfare Command, from the Pentagon, and from 3 different senators who somehow got wind of what happened." He gestured at a stack of papers on his desk. "I have after-action reports from 20 different operators, all telling the same story about a mysterious lieutenant commander who appeared out of nowhere and orchestrated a miracle. Jessica remained silent. Reeves continued, his voice hardening. What I don't have is an explanation for why you were here in the first place. Your orders came directly from JSOC with classification levels above my clearance. I don't know what unit you belong to. I don't know what your mission parameters were. And I don't know why no one thought to inform me that a Tier 1 operator was operating in my area of responsibility. Sir, my presence here was classified precisely because I don't care about the classification. Reeves' voice rose. Then he caught himself, lowering it with visible effort. I care that you came into my command, took control of a high-risk mission, and put yourself and 6 of my personnel in extreme danger without proper authorization from me. Jessica's jaw tightened slightly. Sir, with respect, those 220 SEALs didn't have time for proper authorization. They needed extraction immediately, and I had the skills to execute it. And if you'd failed, if you'd gotten yourself killed, along with 6 operators, what then? I'd be the commander who lost personnel on an unauthorized mission, led by someone I didn't even know was here. Jessica met his eyes directly. But I didn't fail, sir. 220 men are alive who wouldn't be otherwise. The statement hung in the air between them, a challenge disguised as a fact. Reeves stood, walking around his desk, to stand in front of her. He was taller, using his physical presence as another pressure tactic. You're right. You didn't fail. In fact, according to DESA 19, every account I've read, you performed brilliantly. Multiple operators are calling it the most impressive display of tactical leadership and marksmanship they've ever witnessed. He paused, letting that sink in. But that doesn't change the fact that you violated protocol, that you took command without proper authority, that you made decisions that could have resulted in a tactical disaster. Jessica's voice remained steady. Sir, I understand your concerns. But when I arrived and assessed the situation, it was clear that without immediate action, those SEALs would be lost. Sometimes leadership means acting when waiting would be catastrophic. Reeves stared at her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, his expression shifted. The hardness cracked, revealing something underneath, not quite admiration, but respect grudgingly given. You're right, he said quietly. Damn it, you're right, and I hate that you're right. He walked back around his desk and sat down heavily. Commander Chen, I've been in the military for 28 years. I've commanded troops in 3 different combat zones. I pride myself on being a good officer, on following protocol, on doing things by the book. He looked up at her. And then someone like you comes along and reminds me that sometimes the book is wrong. Sometimes the protocol is too slow. Sometimes what's needed isn't a good officer following rules, but an exceptional one breaking them. Jessica didn't respond, sensing he wasn't finished. Reeves pulled a folder from his desk drawer, thin, heavily marked with classification stamps. After you landed, I made some calls. Called in favors. Used every bit of clearance I have. I got pieces of your file. Enough to understand who you are. He opened the folder, scanning the contents. 4 combat deployments that officially don't exist. Operations in 7 different countries, all classified above top secret. You've worked with Delta, with DevGru, with units so black they don't have names. He looked up. You've been shot twice, nearly died from an IED blast in Syria. And you have more confirmed kills than any American female sniper in history. Jessica's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes, discomfort with the exposure, with having her past laid bare. Reeves closed the folder. You're also on record as having turned down 2 promotions because you wanted to stay operational. You refused a Medal of Honor ceremony because you didn't want the publicity. And 3 years ago, You disappeared from the active duty roles entirely, reassigned to a unit that technically doesn't exist. He leaned forward. Commander, you're not just a good operator. You're one of the best this country has ever produced. And I'm a mid-level colonel who was angry that someone more capable than me came in and showed me up. The admission was raw, honest, and completely unexpected. Jessica's posture softened slightly. Sir, that wasn't my intention. I know it wasn't. That's what makes it worse. Reeves smiled, but it was tinged with self-deprecation. You came here to do a job, and you did it brilliantly. You weren't trying to show anyone up. You were just being who you are. He stood again, this time without the aggressive posturing. I owe you an apology, Commander. And I owe those 220 SEALs a debt of gratitude that they're alive because I wasn't so prideful that I blocked your mission. Jessica shook her head. Sir, you didn't block anything. You gave me the opportunity to brief my plan. You allowed volunteers to join me, and you supported the mission. That's good leadership. Is it? Or is it just not getting in the way of someone better? The question was asked without bitterness. Just genuine self-reflection. Jessica thought carefully before responding. Sir, leadership isn't always about being the best at everything. Sometimes it's about recognizing when someone else has the skills you need and empowering them to use those skills. You did that. You could have shut me down, cited protocol, protected your authority. But you didn't. You let the mission come first. Reeves studied her, and slowly, something like understanding crossed his face. You're being generous. I'm being honest, sir. A long silence stretched between them, but it was different now. Not adversarial. Contemplative. Finally, Reeves came to attention. Commander Chen, it has been an honor to have you operate in my area of responsibility, even if I didn't know about it until after the fact. He raised his hand in a salute, deliberate, formal, held with purpose. Jessica returned it, recognizing the significance. This wasn't just military courtesy. This was a senior officer acknowledging that rank didn't always equal capability, that experience didn't always equal wisdom, and that sometimes the best thing a leader could do was step aside and let someone else shine. When they lowered their salutes, Reeves's expression had transformed. The frustration was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like relief. The ceremony tomorrow, he said. I'd like to say a few words. If that's acceptable to you. Jessica nodded. Of course, sir. And Commander? After the ceremony, where do you go? Back to whatever classified unit you came from? Jessica's eyes held a weight that told stories she couldn't speak aloud. I go where I'm needed, sir. Same as always. Reeves nodded slowly. Then I hope, when you're needed again, you remember that not all conventional officers are obstacles. Some of us are just trying to do our best with what we know. I've never thought otherwise, sir. As Jessica turned to leave, Reeves called after her. Commander? One more thing. She paused, looking back. Those men you saved. They're going to tell your story for the rest of their lives. Their children will hear it. Their grandchildren. You've created something that will outlive all of us. He paused. I just wanted you to know that. Jessica's voice was soft. Sir, I didn't do it for the story. I did it because it was right. I know. That's exactly why the story matters. Jessica left the office, the door closing softly behind her. In the hallway, she paused, leaning against the wall for a moment, allowing herself a brief second of vulnerability. The conversation had been harder than the firefight, navigating egos and authority and protocol while trying to remain respectful. But she'd done it. Reeves had started hostile and ended respectful. He'd confronted his own assumptions and grown from them. Not everyone did that. As she pushed off the wall and continued down the hallway, she passed a group of junior enlisted personnel. They stopped, recognizing her, and snapped to attention. One of them, a young private who couldn't have been more than 20, spoke up. "Ma'am, thank you. My brother's a SEAL. He was with Shadow 2-1. You saved his life." Jessica stopped, turning to face him. The young private's eyes were bright with unshed tears, his gratitude palpable and overwhelming. "What's your brother's name?" Jessica asked gently. "Petty Officer, 2nd Class David Martinez, ma'am." Jessica thought back to the faces in the formation that morning. She remembered a Martinez young, dark-haired, with a tattoo of a cross on his forearm. He'd saluted her with shaking hands, his emotions barely controlled. "Your brother's a good operator," Jessica said. "He fought hard out there. You should be proud." The private's face crumpled slightly, emotion breaking through his military bearing. "I am, ma'am. And he called me this morning. He said you were the reason he got to make that call. The reason he'll see his daughter again." Jessica felt her throat tighten. These were the moments that made it real. Not the salutes, or the ceremony, or the recognition. This. A brother grateful his sibling came home. A father who'd see his daughter again. "Your brother earned his way home," Jessica said quietly. "He and 219 others. I just helped clear the path." "Ma'am," with respect. "You did more than that." Jessica looked at the young private, saw the profound gratitude in his eyes, and realized that no amount of deflection would diminish what he felt. So she simply nodded, accepting his thanks with quiet grace. "Tell your brother I said to stay safe out there." "I will, ma'am." "And ma'am, the whole base is talking about what you did. You're a hero." Jessica's smile was small, tinged with something bittersweet. "I'm just a sailor who did her job. Private. Same as your brother. Same as everyone out here." She moved on, leaving the group of enlisted personnel, staring after her, with something approaching awe. But inside, Jessica carried the weight of that conversation. Hero. The word felt heavy, uncomfortable, like a uniform that didn't quite fit. She'd never wanted to be a hero. She'd wanted to be effective. There was a difference. Heroes were elevated, placed on pedestals, turned into symbols. Effective operators were tools precise, reliable, used when needed and stored when not. She preferred being a tool. But the world, it seemed, had other ideas. As she walked back toward her quarters to prepare for the ceremony, the sun reached its zenith, casting short shadows and bright light across the base. Tomorrow would bring recognition, speeches, formality. Tonight, she just wanted to clean her rifle, check her gear, and sleep. Because somewhere, inevitably, there would be another mission. Another valley. Another group of operators who needed someone willing to climb the impossible, hold the untenable, and lead from the front. And Jessica Chen, despite everything, despite the exposure and the discomfort and the unwanted spotlight, she wouldn't say no, because that was who she was. Not a hero. Just a sniper who couldn't stand by when people needed help, and sometimes that was enough. The ceremony was held in an aircraft hangar, cleared of equipment, and set up with rows of chairs facing a small platform. By 17:30 hours, personnel began filing in SEALs, in their dress blues, Marines in their dress uniforms, sailors in their whites, and a scattering of other special operations personnel who'd heard about the ceremony and requested permission to attend. By 1800 hours, the hangar was packed. Over 400 people, standing room only, the air thick with anticipation. Jessica stood in a small ready room adjacent to the hangar, wearing her dress uniform for the first time in years. The fabric felt restrictive after so long in combat fatigues, and the ribbons on her chest felt like targets, drawing eyes and questions she didn't want to answer. Captain Torres appeared in the doorway. "They're ready for you, Commander." Jessica took a breath. "Ma'am, is there any way we could simplify this? Maybe just a brief acknowledgement rather than a full ceremony." Torres smiled sympathetically. "I know you'd prefer that. But Commander, these men need this. They need to publicly honor what you did, to make it real, to put it into words. And honestly, so do you. I don't need recognition, ma'am. Maybe not. But you need to accept that what you did was extraordinary. You need to let these warriors tell you that you made a difference." Torres stepped closer. "Commander, I've watched you deflect every compliment, minimize every achievement. At some point, you need to stand still and let people honor you. Not for your ego, but for them." Jessica considered this, then nodded slowly. "Understood, ma'am. Good. Now let's go show them who Wraith really is." They walked through a side entrance into the hangar. The moment Jessica appeared, the entire formation came to attention with a sound like thunder. 400 pairs of boots striking concrete simultaneously. 400 bodies snapping into perfect posture. Jessica walked across the open floor toward the platform. Her steps measured, her bearing military perfect despite the discomfort. She climbed the stairs and took her position beside Colonel Reeves and Captain Torres. Reeves stepped to the microphone. At ease. The formation relaxed slightly, but eyes remained locked on the platform. Reeves began. 24 hours ago, 220 Navy SEALs were stranded in hostile territory, facing odds that no reasonable person would accept. Ammunition was low. Medical supplies were depleted. Enemy forces were converging. Extraction seemed impossible. His voice carried clearly through the hangar, measured and formal. Command asked for volunteers to lead a rescue operation. Most of the planning staff believed the mission was suicide. Some recommended waiting for better conditions. Others suggested accepting that losses were inevitable. He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. And then a lieutenant commander, who wasn't even officially assigned to this base, stepped forward and said she had a plan. Heads turned slightly toward Jessica, who stood at attention, eyes forward. "I'll be honest with you all. My first reaction was skepticism. I didn't know Commander Chen. I didn't know her background. I didn't know that I was standing in the presence of one of the most decorated special operations personnel in U.S. military history." A murmur rippled through the formation. Commander Jessica Chen has served in combat operations across 7 countries. She has worked with every Tier 1 special operations unit in our military. She has over 400 confirmed enemy kills, most from distances exceeding 800 meters. She has been awarded 4 Navy Crosses, 2 Silver Stars, a Purple Heart, and a Medal of Honor that she refused to accept publicly. The murmur grew louder. Even personnel who'd heard parts of the story were learning new details. Reeves continued. Her call sign, Wraith, became legend in the special operations community. Stories were told about her: a sniper who could hit impossible shots, a leader who never left anyone behind, an operator who seemed to appear and disappear like a ghost. Some people thought the stories were exaggerated. Some thought Wraith was multiple people combined into one myth. He turned to look at Jessica directly. "But standing here is the proof that Wraith is real. One person, one extraordinary warrior. And 24 hours ago, she lived up to every story ever told about her." He stepped back from the microphone, and Captain Torres stepped forward. "I've been in the Navy for 32 years, Torres began. "I've seen remarkable acts of courage. But what Commander Chen did goes beyond courage. It requires tactical genius, physical endurance, and a level of marksmanship that most operators will never achieve in their entire careers. She pulled out a paper, reading from the official citation. Commander Jessica Chen is awarded the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat operations. While leading a 6-person rescue team into hostile territory, Commander Chen displayed exceptional tactical leadership, conducting a solo climb of a cliff face under NDCP, enemy fire, to establish an overwatch position. From this position, she engaged and neutralized multiple enemy combatants with precision fire that enabled the extraction of 220 Navy SEALs who were otherwise facing certain capture or death. Torres paused, her voice thickening slightly with emotion. During the subsequent withdrawal, Commander Chen voluntarily remained in an exposed position to cover the retrograde of friendly forces, engaging superior enemy numbers while sustaining injuries. Her actions directly saved the lives of 220 American service members and prevented a tactical disaster that would have resulted in the largest single loss of special operations personnel in modern military history. The Fercentine hangar was completely silent except for Torres' voice. Commander Chen's heroism, tactical brilliance, and selfless service reflect the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. Torres stepped back, and a senior enlisted SEAL, the Master Chief who'd fought beside Jessica, stepped forward carrying a small blue box. Colonel Reeves took the box and approached Jessica. She came to attention automatically. Commander Chen, by order of the Secretary of the Navy, you are hereby awarded the Navy Cross. He opened the box, revealing the medal, a bronze cross, on a blue ribbon with white stripes. He pinned it to her uniform, just below her other ribbons, his hands steady but his expression conveying profound respect. When he finished, he stepped back and saluted. Jessica returned the salute, her face composed but her eyes bright. Then, from the back of the hangar, a single voice called out, "Attention!" The entire formation snapped back to attention. "Present. Arms." 400 hands rose in salute. The sound was deafening, a physical force that seemed to shake the hangar itself. Jessica stood before them, small and alone on the platform, and returned the salute. She held it, scanning the faces before her, seeing the SEALs she'd saved, the team who'd followed her into hell, the Marines and sailors and operators who'd become witnesses to something they'd never forget. Her composure finally cracked. A tear slipped down her cheek, then another, and she didn't wipe them away. She let them fall, acknowledgement that this moment had broken through her carefully maintained walls. Order. Arms. The salutes lowered, but the formation remained at attention. Colonel Reeves returned to the microphone. "Commander Chen has requested the opportunity to address you." Jessica stepped forward, her voice quiet at first, then strengthening. "I don't have a speech prepared. I'm not good at speeches." A few quiet chuckles rippled through the formation. "But I want you all to understand something. What happened yesterday wasn't about me. It was about every person who refused to accept that those 220 SEALs were beyond help." She gestured to her team. It was about 6 operators who trusted a plan from someone they didn't know, who followed despite their doubts, who fought with everything they had. Dalton, Brennan, Rivers, Diaz, Martinez, retry, be continue, and Cole stood straighter, recognition washing over them. It was about 3 SEAL chiefs who volunteered to hold an impossible position, who fought beside me when they could have stayed safe. The Master Chief and his 2 companions nodded, emotions clear on their weathered faces. It was about 220 SEALs who held on in desperate circumstances, who trusted that help would come, who fought to stay alive long enough to be rescued. She paused, her voice dropping lower, more intimate, despite the crowd. I've been called a legend today. Called a hero. Given a medal that honors extraordinary service. But I want you to know every shot I took because someone taught me. Every tactical decision I made came from lessons learned from operators who came before me. Every moment of courage I showed was inspired by warriors who'd shown me what courage looked like. She touched the new medal on her chest. This doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to every sniper who ever taught me to read wind. Every team leader who showed me what it means to put the mission above yourself. Every operator I've ever served with who demonstrated that being elite isn't about being better than everyone else, it's about being reliable when reliability means the difference between life and death. The hangar was absolutely silent. Every person hanging on her words. If I'm a legend, it's only because I stood on the shoulders of legends who came before me. If I'm a hero, it's only because I learned from heroes who never got recognized. She looked across the formation. So when you tell this story, and I know you will, don't make it about one person doing the impossible. Make it about what happens when an entire community commits to never leaving anyone behind. Make it about the culture we've built together, where the mission comes first and the operators come always. She stepped back from the microphone, and for a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, one person began to clap. Then another. Then the entire formation. And the applause built like a wave, becoming a standing ovation that echoed through the hangar with the force of thunder. Jessica stood there, accepting it with quiet grace, and for the first time since Kandahar Ridge, she allowed herself to feel something she'd pushed away for years. Pride. Not in herself, but in what they'd accomplished together. The ceremony concluded, the formation dismissed, and personnel began filing out. But many lingered, forming informal groups, sharing their own memories of what had happened. Jessica stepped down from the platform, intending to slip away quietly, but she was immediately surrounded. SEALs she'd saved, operators she'd led, personnel who'd witnessed what she'd done, all wanting a moment, a word, a chance to thank her personally. She spent the next hour shaking hands, accepting gratitude, listening to stories of how her actions had impacted individual lives. A SEAL told her his wife was pregnant with their first child, and he'd feared he'd never meet his daughter. Because of Jessica, he would. Another operator described how he'd been ready to give up, convinced they were all going to die, until he saw her rifle flashes on the ridge and found hope again. Each story carved itself into her memory, adding weight to what she carried. When the crowd finally thinned, Dalton approached with his team. They stood before her, uncertain, until Brennan spoke up. "Ma'am, we wanted to say, we've learned more from one mission with you than from years of training. About humility. About leadership. About what it really means to be an operator." Jessica smiled. "And I learned from you. About giving people second chances. About earning trust instead of demanding it." Rivers stepped forward. "Ma'am, if you ever need a team again, I know." Jessica interrupted gently. "You've told me. And I believe you." They left. And Jessica finally found a moment of quiet. She walked outside, into the evening air, and stood alone on the tarmac where, just that morning, 220 SEALs had saluted her. The base had transformed around her. Word had spread beyond just those who attended the ceremony. Now, as personnel saw her, they straightened. Some saluted. Others just watched with respect. The quiet lieutenant commander who'd arrived anonymously was now the most famous person on the base. It was everything she'd never wanted. And yet, she touched the Navy Cross on her chest, feeling its weight. This medal represented lives saved, a mission accomplished, a moment when everything she'd trained for had mattered. Maybe Torres was right. Maybe she needed to accept this. Not the fame or the attention, but the simple acknowledgement that what she did mattered. That her skills, her sacrifices, her years of service had made a real difference. Captain Torres found her there, standing alone in the fading light. "How are you holding up, Commander?" Jessica considered the question. "Honestly, ma'am, I'm not sure yet." Torres nodded. "That's fair. This kind of exposure takes adjustment." She paused. "Your orders came through. You're being reassigned." Jessica wasn't surprised. "Where?" "Can't tell you. It's above my clearance. But wherever it is, they want you there in 72 hours. Jessica nodded. 3 days. Enough time to recover physically, to process what had happened, to prepare for whatever came next. "And Commander? One more thing." Torres' expression was serious. "They're promoting you to full commander. It's already been approved." Jessica closed her eyes briefly. More rank meant more responsibility, less operational work, more administrative duties. "I didn't ask for a promotion, ma'am." "I know. But after yesterday, they're not asking. You've proven you can lead at the highest levels. They want you in a position where you can do more of it." Jessica wanted to argue, to explain that she preferred being operational. That rank would take her away from the work she loved. But she was also tired. Tired of fighting the system. Tired of trying to stay invisible. Maybe it was time to accept that her path had changed. "Understood, ma'am." Torres smiled. "Get some rest, Commander. You've earned it." As Torres walked away, Jessica remained on the tarmac, watching the sun set behind the mountains where, just yesterday, she'd fought to save 220 lives. The future was uncertain. Her anonymity was gone. Her path had shifted. But she was still a sniper. Still an operator. Still someone who stood up when others were in danger. That hadn't changed. And as long as that core remained, the rest was just details. She took one last look at the mountains, whispered a quiet thanks to the warriors who'd taught her, who'd inspired her, who'd made her capable of moments like yesterday. Then she turned and walked back into the base, carrying the weight of recognition with the same quiet dignity she'd always carried the weight of service. Because in the end, that was what mattered. Not the medals or the ceremonies or the salutes, but the willingness to stand, to serve, to sacrifice. Everything else was just noise. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These true tales keep the courage alive for generations to come. And in the comments, tell us where you're watching from and who's the quiet leader you'll never forget.